Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. Welcome to the Frontline Innovators podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lake, and we've got another great episode lined up for today. Our guest today is the Executive Vice President of Strategic Consulting at Evora IT Solutions. Please welcome to the Frontline Innovators, Bill Padula. Hello, Bill.
Hello, Justin. Thank you. Good to be here.
Really excited to have you here. You have a very interesting path, past down the mobile path, and I'm really excited to be able to explore that with our guests. So let's start off as we do with every show and ask you what you think is the biggest challenge facing the deskless or frontline workforce today.
That's a great question. And to me, the biggest challenge facing kind of that workforce is that the providers and the implementers, we'll say, of the applications that they use don't always fully appreciate or understand the environment that they work in or the mentality of the worker. And what I mean by mentality is if they're, I work with a lot of field service maintenance technicians, and their focus is on installing equipment, repairing the broken machine, putting a pipe in the ground, whatever it is, like they're wrench turning work. The mobile application that they use is just a tool that they have to do their job, but they don't really understand the technology behind it. They don't want to understand the technology. It's not that they can, it's just their focus is on doing the job that they're going out to do and the orders that they have and that kind of thing. And the app and the device and the technology is really secondary. It's kind of a necessary evil. I got to use this thing. I got to put my time in it, record my parts, whatever have you. But I don't really care how it works. I just want it to work when I have to use it. And then I can go back and doing the stuff that I like to do or is really my job. Yeah. I think that's the biggest challenge, along with their environment, right? Sometimes they're working outside, they're working in the sub basement, they're working up in a turbine, they're just out and about, and that environment is different every day. They could be on a manufacturing floor where there's a big equipment and loud machines, right? It's not always clean and tidy. It's not an office. It's dirty. It's not micro dirty, but it's not a clean environment, right? So understanding that, or the lack of understanding of that, I think makes a challenge to the users when they get these apps, and they're supposed to use them. And it's all right, they're not techie people, right? Some are, right? But they're not. That's not their passion. Right. And so they look at it as, how do I use this? How do I put it in? And how do I just be done with it so I can go back to doing my other stuff? And they don't know what SAP is. They don't know what Oracle is, or Salesforce, or ServiceNow, whatever your big backend system. Like, they may have heard the names, but they don't really want to know the processes and how it all ties in. It's, how does this machine that I'm working on tie into the process in the plant or in the power lines or the water network, whatever it is. That's what they know and want to know. The app that they use is really just, hey, I got to put my stuff in there. I get it, but I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want it to be hard. I want it to just work and it's easy and I'm done with it as quick as I can.
I really want to come back. First of all, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that you just said. Specifically the part about providers don't know the environment. And I want to come back to that. But before I do that, I'd like to give our audience a chance to understand a little bit about your background and what gives you the perspective that you have. So give us a little bit about your journey and what's led you to Evora IT Solutions.
Sure. So yeah, I've been at Evora for 8 years, a little over 8 years. Right now I manage our North American SAP practice. But my background really started in technology, but in mobility in 1999 when I started at a little company called Cyclo. And I was, one of the first consultants. I went out and implemented the apps. I did the training for the users. I went ride-alongs with users. I saw how it was all used firsthand, and spent time with the techs, and have been stayed in the mobile game as it's evolved. And back then, it was CDPD networks. There wasn't Wi-Fi as we know it now. Wi-Fi networks that we're also used to didn't really come into play until the early 2000s. We didn't have iPhones, we didn't have iPads. We had little HP Jornadas or Novatel contacts. We had these different kind of fit for purpose devices. It wasn't it's my phone and my tablet that I use for everything, and I do
Yeah.
this work stuff on
I was going to ask how you
Um,
could possibly have been in mobility in 1999 when the iPhone didn't get launched until 2007. Like, how is that
yeah.
even possible?
There were a bunch of devices, well, I shouldn't say a bunch, but there were several devices that ran Windows CE. And it was the predominant kind of mobile operating system. And fun part about Windows CE is the devices had a main battery that was rechargeable, and they had a backup battery. And if both of those went flat, the device reset itself. So you kind of had to take that into account too. Where do people charge things? Having to charge your device all the time was a new concept. Because people didn't, cell phones were there, but not everybody had them. They were still kind of becoming mainstream as well.
And those
But
devices all had proprietary charging solutions anyway, right?
yeah, yeah. So you had to go, you're rolling out 70 technicians. Where do you put the bank of 70 chargers? They can all come in and plug their devices in, and at
Yeah.
the end of their shift. You had to think like all that stuff. A little different now because everybody's used to having the devices and they think about charging them. But it's been interesting to see it evolve, right? Because people are more familiar with technology. Back then it was brand new. You handed a device to a group of techs that you were going to train, and they're like, "What's this?" Like, I got no idea what this thing is. And the devices used to come with solitaire on them, right? And they actually would use it as a training tool, like how to touch the screen, because you'd have a stylus and it was touch screen, and solitaire was the way to teach them how hard to press, not hard to press, because they'd be afraid they're going to tap the screen and they're going to break it with the little stylus. It was new. It was foreign. It wasn't, people didn't have smartphones. Really, that came with the iPhone, where people got more comfortable. And then from there, we got Android, you got iPhone, everything's out there, and people are like, "Oh, it's a device. I get the device." But you had to start with training on what's the device and how does it work before you even got to the application, and how does the application work and how do I use that.
So what happened with Cyclo?
Cyclo continued to grow. When I started, we primarily did mobile applications for maintenance and service, right? And when I was there, well, when we started, it was a lot of Maxima was the back end, as well as some data streams and Infor, like other systems. We got into SAP in kind of the mid 2000s, and then eventually we were acquired by SAP in 2012. So then I stayed at SAP for about a year, and then I kind of went into the consulting business outside, and went through a couple of big SIs, and then came to Evora. So we got a little exposure in the middle to kind of non-maintenance mobile applications. When I was with HCL, kind of everything else, which was pretty cool to take what I knew and from that perspective and apply it in other areas. And then at Evora, we do a lot of mobility for SAP. We also do scheduling. Scheduling kind of is a natural evolution. When you put in a mobile solution, you're taking people paperless a lot still, but back in the day, it was always, we're moving off paper to the system. Well, how do we assign the work to the technicians? A lot of people would start their day with like a morning meeting where the lead or the supervisor would hand out the paper work orders or give them the clipboards with what they were supposed to do, and then they'd turn them in at the end of the day, and some admin would key them in usually. Sometimes the technicians, but it was more costly to have a technician do it. Plus, they would have to learn the system, which was a whole nother thing. But yeah, it was kind of so I got more into scheduling because that goes hand in hand with mobility, right? As you mobilize people, how do we digitally assign the work? How do we schedule it? How can we look at the results and kind of the whole maintenance process and service process from a digital execution perspective?
So you and I were introduced by a mutual customer, and I knew from the minute I looked at your background and the way that we were introduced, I knew that we were going to have a lot to talk about. And you started off by saying that providers don't know the environment or mentality of the workforce. And I want to go back to that because I agree with you completely. And I'm still scratching my head a little bit. on why this happens. I have some theories about the reasons, but I'd like to just get your take on it, because to me, it seems so obvious when I'm talking to somebody else. You've already mentioned things like doing ride-alongs and going out, and you said not micro dirty, but dirty. I love that expression. That'll probably be the quote for the episode today. It's not micro dirty, but it's dirty. So, you've been out there, you've seen a day in the life of the men and women that are out in the field in these roles, but a lot of the providers, the big players in particular, just seem to not get it. They haven't spent a day in the life. And I'm curious why that is. And I want to get your take on that. Why do you think they just haven't taken the time to understand? Because it often represents the majority of the workforce.
Yeah.
And yet it seems to be this like huge blind spot for them.
I wish I could tell you why. It back in the Cyclo days, I was the consultant for a while, and then I actually ran pre-sales and kind of, we'd take a lot of the feedback that we heard and feed it back into product development from what we heard, what we saw in the field, when the techs would be like, I don't get it, right? How can we help it be better? But I don't, to answer your question, I don't know. You see design of apps, and I look at some of them, and I kind of think to myself, you might get an award for like design from this is the most beautiful screen ever, but it's not practically functional for the technician. Like I was talking to somebody years ago, and I'm like, when you ever see the systems that like stock traders use on the floor? It's a screen, it's jammed full of numbers. They know where everything is, they can read it, they don't want it to change, and they can, it totally works for them, right? It's got a lot of information flowing through. And I think to a mobile technician, they kind of want the same thing. Like, I don't want to have to click a lot of places to go see the information. I don't need big graphics that tell me the status of the work, what's the current work order, and how long have I been working on it. Like, I know where I am and I know what I'm doing. And really, it's the same process. If I'm doing a preventative maintenance on a pump, I kind of know the routine. I know what I'm doing. I really need to know, where do I go? What am I doing when I'm there? And yeah, I need to record some parts and record the time and give you the information that the business wants to, push all the other processes that have to happen around it. But they don't need a lot of pretty graphics. It doesn't need to be super pretty. It needs to be really functional.
Right.
And can I get what I need out of it quickly? And that's what they want. Why people kind of go the other way with it. Some of it is the sales process of you got to walk in the room, you got to show your app, and the people inside the four walls, call it in corporate or in the office, who aren't as familiar with what happens in the field, want it to look pretty.
Yep.
And I've heard people say, we want the application to look the same in the office and out in the field. And so all different types of users can use it. And I challenge that, because I say the folks who work in the field don't come in the office, and you don't really want them in the office, because then they're not out in the field.
They're not making money.
Folks in the field, or excuse me, the folks in the office, they may go out to the field, but when they go out to the field, they're not picking up the wrenches and doing the work. Maybe they're supervising, or maybe they're doing something, but they're not. It's different jobs for different people, and the roles are different within the company. And the field force is often, the majority of the workforce, particularly in the field service or in some of these maintenance organizations. They're a big chunk of the operation. Right? In a manufacturing company, the people working on the manufacturing line probably way outnumber the maintenance staff. But if you're a utility and you got field workers, or you're a oil and gas type company and you get the folks that are out maintaining all the wells and everything that happens out there, that's the majority of the workforce. And that's where the information comes from that want to drive your processes. So you got to tailor it and dial it in for them and make it easy for them.
I agree with that. I have a theory. Let me run this by you and see what your take is, because it seems to me most of the time a company is implementing big digital transformation initiatives. It's often not necessarily aimed at making the life of the frontline worker better. It often is tied to a bigger, more strategic initiative from the C-suite or elsewhere in, at the corporate office about objectives that they're trying to accomplish. Could be improved revenue, it could be better cost accounting, it could be improved inventory accuracy, right? All the other kind of big initiatives that drive profitability, right, in the bottom line. And it seems to me that if that's the initiative, if that's the focus, that's also what causes there to be some overlook, for the field, because we're trying to accomplish inventory accuracy. And so this mobile app that we're asking the field service guys or the delivery drivers to use is just a means to that end. But to the point that you just made, they often represent the majority of the user population. So when we see things break down on these digital transformation initiatives, it's because the majority of the workforce hasn't been involved, right? They are a necessary component. They end up becoming the weak link in the chain. And that's not because of them. That's because we haven't really given them the attention that they need, or to all the things you just said about the design of the application. We're trying to make it look the way that the accounting department wants it. And we're sticking that user interface onto, a mobile device, but that's not what the field tech needs. The field tech's doing a different job in a different place on a different device. Why are we mirroring the user interface from corporate? Well, you think there's anything to that the motivation is coming from corporate, not from the field, and that's what's maybe causing the providers to just not pay enough attention to the field workers?
Yeah, I think they're often the initiative comes from corporate, right? How can we save money? How can we improve our operations? How can we be more efficient? That kind of thing, right? And then they look and they go, okay, mobility is the way to do that. We hear it works well, so let's invest in mobile. But they don't often always fully appreciate what that investment takes. Like, here, we're going to stick in the app, give it to the field, and they're going to use it. But it's that piece of understanding how the field works, dialing in the app to be what they want. And you can have apps that there's 5 different ways to do things. When you go to technician, you go to a lot of people, frankly, give me one way, and that one way works all the time, and just teach me the one way. I don't want to know all 10 different ways that I can do this. And then they've got one path. They get too much information. Something's like, when you complete a work order, there's a lot of costing that goes on and needs to post to whatever your backend system is, right? The technician doesn't really care. He just wants to say, I use this part. It was there. I put in my 2 hours. Here's when I started the work. Here's when I finished the work. Are there any safety concerns? I'm done. Right?
Done.
Let that all happen in the back end and roll up. And the back office people, what about this case? Where does it go? Where does the cost go? How do you break that down and make it easy for the technician to say, I did this or I did that? And that's an English word that they know. I often kind of go, let's put it in English, because they don't speak techie. They don't speak the technology.
Right.
They don't speak finance, right? Just what's the words that they know, and they can go, oh, it's it was blue, it was red, or whatever the simple breakdown is, and that translates back to what goes in the 10 different codes that can be in the system.
Yeah. Bill, something you said just really struck a chord with me, because I've witnessed this exact scenario, and this has been an evolution. So if you go back to the days of Cyclo and many of the early mobile applications that we were rolling out on Windows CE and Windows Mobile back in the early days, pre-iPhone, pre-Android, all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. There was a very linear workflow in most of those applications, right? You had a sequence of steps that you went through, and it followed a day in the life of the worker in most cases when they were done well. And there's been this evolution that's happened. Another thing that I can't really explain why, other than because it's possible development teams and product owners have chosen to do this. But I literally sat in a client meeting where we were doing some discovery with them to understand how their software worked. And they said, well, there's 5 different ways that a user can go do this thing. Literally, it was almost verbatim what you just said. And my first question was like, why would you go through the trouble of creating 5 different ways to do the same thing? And I think what's happened is software vendors want to talk about their flexibility and configurability and all of these things that sound magical when you're in the sales and marketing process. But then when it actually comes down to like where the rubber meets the road, no user in the world wants to have to figure out between 5 ways to do something. So this was in the context of Skillful. And we said to the customer, okay, well, we need to work together to pick the one way, that we would consider a best practice, because we're not going to go train them on 5 ways to do something. We're going to train them on the one way that's most efficient and the best practice, the most productive way. Any hints as to what's your take on why vendors are doing this? I think they're actually causing themselves more harm, certainly causing the frontline workers more harm, but I think they're causing themselves more harm in an attempt to sound agile and flexible and have all these great capabilities. Any hot takes on that?
Yeah, I think it's to try to differentiate themselves from the other vendor, right?
Yeah,
We're
the other guys
flexible,
only
we
have
can do
3
all this,
ways to do this.
I got all this different ways to do it. It's not, I have a process that you can just follow, right? Or we can adapt it a little bit, but I don't need to redo it. It's here. And they want to sound flexible. They want to sound like I can do everything. And that's what a lot of people want to hear. I think some of it is the audience that's listening to the vendor pitch educated on what what the field needs or what they really want to consider when they're doing their evaluation. Does it matter that there's 5 different ways to do it, or do you need 1 way or 2 way? This condition that I'm inside, I'm outside. These are the conditions that I'm going to roll through it. Yeah, it's a challenge that what we find is we often are simplifying the apps. We're taking some of the options out. So there's 1 or 2 ways to do it, or there's one example I use is there's a inventory application where you can do different movement types, and there's 5 or 6 of them that the user would pick from a drop down, and then go to a screen where some of the fields were enabled and some of them were disabled, and kind of scroll around and find the right field that they want to put everything in. And we took it and we said, okay, no more drop down. Here's a button that says issue to work order, issue to sales order, issue to cost center. Here's 3 buttons. And when you click that button, it's all the same transaction under the hood with a different type. But here's the screen with just the 4 fields you need. You're done. Here's the screen, just the 5 fields you need. You're done. To the user, they go, oh, I'm issuing you an order. It simplifies it. They don't know all the back end coding and stuff. You got to keep that stuff simple. And I think that makes a big difference in usability. But why does everybody want to put all the options in there? I just think it goes back to my initial point. They don't realize that the user community doesn't want all the options. That's not what they understand or what they want to understand. Their real job is something else. And this is just the system, the system of record, or the system we need to keep track of it. They don't care about all that stuff. You get somebody every once in a while who does and really gets to know it well, but the learning curve on that is also steeper, right? If you got to know what every type is without a good description in a techie term, the mechanic doesn't know it, doesn't care.
Yeah. Well, it feels to me, looking back over the history of the last 2 decades or so, in an attempt to bring more and more digital solutions to the front lines of the global economy, we've placed a significant greater burden on the men and women on the front lines to have to adopt more technology. There's more variability, all the things that we're talking about here. And it's kind of funny to think back to 2 decades ago when you were talking about, literally being at Cycle at 1999, that, I actually think the technology, it was a little bit more foreign at the time because we were doing things on mobile then that seemed more futuristic, I guess, for lack of a better term. But the reality was that those workflows were they were fairly rudimentary, but I mean that in actually a good way, right? They were linear. It was simple to understand, and it followed a day in the life of that technician. And unfortunately, we've kind of gotten away from that a little bit. And now the average frontline worker, I don't know, I don't have a statistical, we haven't done any research on this, but just anecdotally, I would say the average frontline worker in field service or delivery applications probably has 3, 4, or 5 different applications that they have to need to use to do their job. And in all of those cases, there are multiple workflows in order to perform each of those functions.
Yeah. And the more you can tie that together into one system or one consistent workflow and guide them through what they're doing, the easier it is for them. It's that the simplistic approach is really what I think makes the difference. And as you said, in the early days, we were kind of limited. It was simplistic because that's kind of all we could do.
Right.
And now we've got a lot of options, but even from the flexibility and the configurability of the apps, it used to be limited. we can only do so much. You can only change so much in your application, and now you can change everything. And that's the good news and the bad news.
Right. Just because we can doesn't mean that we should.
We should. And how do we, but we need to do something.
Yeah.
You always got to dial it in a little bit. But
so when I'm talking to folks that have been around the kind of quote unquote enterprise mobility space since before the iPhone and, before iOS and Android, it's interesting and not at all surprising to me the percentage of times that those folks, you're an example of this, immediately talk about doing ride-alongs and spending time in the field to see the women and men out in the field, how they are working, how they're doing their job, what tools they're using. You even mentioned environmental circumstances and stuff like that. So that's all near and dear to my heart. I'm wondering if some of the folks listening would be curious to hear, what are some of the observations that you've made? Is any story come to your mind about something that maybe wasn't obvious when you were meeting with the client back in the conference room, but when you got to go spend a day, with a tech in the field, that you kind of came back to the conference room after and said, I had an epiphany moment because I saw this thing out in the field? Does anything come to mind?
A few things. Like, one is just the focus or the objective they have on doing their job. I went along with right along with the delivery driver for a soda manufacturer, right, and or distributor, and like going into the stores, reloading the shelves, every bottle's facing forward. Really, this is what I'm paying attention to, and I got to do the app and go check out with the guy who runs the store. The another is kind of the terminology and their familiarization with it. We used to do, like, I would do training and then go on the ride along kind of the next day and help support them as they're adopting to the application. And you would find out that if you said transmit, synchronize, upload, download, whatever, post, send, like every word you could have for synchronizing your app, they kind of would be like, what are you saying? Like, pick a word and go with it and just keep it simple. And seeing that but they'll also understand it all. Like, if you can explain it and it's simple and clear, they'll these are people that can fix anything that's broken, right? So they can pick up how to do anything if you just explain it to them in their language and not the corporate language. And they don't, they're focused on their job. They're focused on that piece of it, and a lot of them are really passionate about it. Some have been doing it for a few years, some have been doing it for 20 years, whatever. That's what their objective. They want to do that. They want to do their job. They want to go home at the end of the day, go to their family, go hunting, go whatever it is, go fishing, whatever. Right? That's their focus. And if the app doesn't work for them and the app slows them down, they just get frustrated with it. And then, the corporate side doesn't get what they want out of it. If you give them what they need, then they use it, and it drives everything. And I think that's what I kind of learned early, was dial in the app, let the users like it, and keep it simple. And then it goes. There's always exceptions to everything in your story about somebody who didn't like the device and device got thrown through a truck or what. Like, you get exceptions everywhere, but the vast majority of people are there to do their job, to do a good job, and deliver the work.
Yeah. Actually, you just said something else that's a bit of a trigger for me too, which is kind of catering to the exceptions rather than the majority. I feel like that comes up a lot. I'll hear some anecdote that, oh, well, you don't understand, Justin, our guys are still using flip phones in the field. And I'm like, okay, there's a guy. You have 1,000 techs. There's 2 guys that are still using flip phones, but don't give me the bullshit that they're all still using flip phones. Right. Because Facebook has 2 billion users and your guys are probably on Facebook and Instagram, right? Yeah. Like, I know they're out there. I know they're using smartphones, but what happens is we get one example of some guy that's got a flip phone and we say, well, we lower our expectations of the entire workforce and their ability or our ability to be successful because we found 1 or 2 guys out in the field with a flip phone or some other limitation that is essentially self-imposed limitation. And the reality is, in my hypothetical here, there's 998 other people that are using an Android device in their personal life. They're FaceTiming with their family, right?
Yeah.
They're doing all of these other things, but we're going to impose limitations on our ability to be successful because we stumbled across Jimmy, who's still insistent on using a smartphone, right? Or not using a smartphone, excuse me.
Yeah.
And I think that holds people back. I think people listening to this work in organizations that are held back from being as successful as they could be, because instead of just ignoring the 2 or 3 exceptions in their organization, they get hyper focused on that and use it as an excuse to be successful. And so I think your point is very well taken.
You made me think of something as you were saying that too, which is a lot of it is change, and it's just fear of change. I remember
Yes.
teaching a class years ago, and I did 2 different classes, and they were all like, "Oh, wait till Jimmy," I don't remember his name, like comes in for the next one, right? I'm like, all right. And this guy walks in, he's 6'8", he's a big dude, right?
Yeah.
And kind of gruff and the whole deal. And I'm like, all right, I'm like, here's what we're doing. And we taught him how to use the app, and he's like, all right, wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And it's fear of change, and
Yeah.
a lot of it is change management. How do you teach the people to use this? How do you get them comfortable with the idea? Why are we doing this? There's the why are we doing this, but how does it work? What's your piece in it? It's not that big of a deal. Like I remember when I made I was teaching a class, and these guys were kind of hemming and hawing, and they were both wearing John Deere hats. And I'm like, and they were kind of old guys. And one guy's like, can we just hold off on this whole thing till I retire? And I'm
Right.
like,
I'm 12 months away. Just buy me
that's not
another
my
12
call.
months.
I'm here now. Right. And I finally, I'm like, how old's your tractor? And he's like, which one? I'm like, your oldest one, and it's 1950 something. That was my grandfather's, whatever. I'm like, what happens when that thing breaks? He's like, I fix it. I'm like, exactly. You can fix anything. You can figure this out.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of confidence. It's unknown. It's new. It's change. Why do people still have flip phones? Because they're comfortable with them. That
Yes.
they only want to text. Maybe they don't want to look stuff up on the internet. Okay. Right. But you can figure out how to use these apps and do it. And if you keep the app simple and it's not crazy, and it only plays more to them. But you're right, there's often a lot of exception management. Oh, we can't do this over here. They do it this way. They'll never do this. Like this is your chance to change. But some of that exception doesn't always come from the field. It comes from the office sometimes too.
I agree.
I had one where it was thought of that technicians out in the field, we were kind of designing process, and I'm like, okay, the tech's out in the field, and you send them out to this oil field to do whatever you're supposed to do, right? When they see something else that needs to get done, they want to be able to create a work order and record that they did it. So that they, the time they spend and all that. And they're like, oh, no. It has to go through approvals. Anytime they create a work order, it's got to go through approvals, right? So they, once you get, I'm like, but the guy's going to do the work in the field, right? And you're not going to send him back out there a second time. You gotta work through the back office exceptions too.
So obviously training is near and dear to us. And one of the things that you just mentioned that I think is really important, and it was a relatively new learning for me since we've had Skillful, is that you talked about the change management element being really important. And I think one of the unexpected things that we've come across a lot is the anxiety and fear that the people that we support have about learning in the production environment. They're afraid to break something as they're learning. And so they feel like people are looking over their shoulder, during this exercise. And at the risk of turning this into a commercial for Skillful, that's not my intent. But one of the learnings that we've had here is that the value of simulation training gives them a safe place so that they can go into the software or something that feels like the software because it's a simulation, and they can lower that anxiety a little bit. So it's not just about informing them about how to do that workflow in a particular way, but it's about giving them a safe place to go practice that.
Yeah.
And that's been it's been motivating to me personally as one of the leaders of this business, but also as just somebody who's always cared a lot about the people that we support in the field, and just having a deeper understanding of what's causing them to be resistant. It's they want to do well. As you've said several times in this conversation already, they're actually really good at doing their job. They're proficient, they're efficient. They are representing their brand well in front of their customer, right? They're doing all the core things that we want them to do. But now we've introduced this new technology and it takes away their self-confidence a little bit because they have to learn something new. And so how can we make that easy on them, so that they can feel that they can learn in a safe environment? And of course, our technology is one piece to do that, but that's just part of the picture. And I'm actually curious to see, I mean, you've been around the block in the mobility space for a long time. What are some of the techniques and practices that you've implemented to help ensure that the folks that you're supporting on the mobile side of things are able to learn successfully? Any best practices you can share with us?
Yeah, and I've got a story for you first that we thought of as I've learned more about your platform, right? But the evolution of technology has kind of made training more challenging. So back in the day when I started doing this, and you had these devices that were fit for purpose, you could put a memory card in it, and you could say you could make 10 work orders that you kind of copy them, put them on a memory card, go to every device, pop the thing in, copy them, and your 10 folks in your training class all had the exact same 10 work orders that were dummies, right? And you could walk through and teach them, and they would click on the device and use the application, kind of live to learn it, right? The apps all ran offline, so you just never synchronized it at the end. And when you were done, you just delete it, right? And then go give them their real work. With the evolution of technology, that people started worrying about security. I don't know
Yep.
why, right? So you now everything's secured, everything's encrypted, databases are encrypted, it's tied to your user. Doing that, you can't do that way anymore. So to do training, you have to go to a training environment, and someone has to go create 10 work orders for 10 people, which is 100 work orders. You got to download them to devices. You got to and then you could go through and do the training, but then you got to kind of throw all that junk data away when you're done, right? So it's made the training process a little more like that's labor intensive. So then we look at alternatives. Well, maybe we'll just do it all in PowerPoint, right? Or we'll do a video training. And people, it's made it harder to train the users because they're not touching and feeling and loving the application. And to me, that's always been the best, is when you can give them the device. And nowadays, they're usually familiar with the device, right?
Right.
Unless it's got a case and maybe it has some bells and whistles. But in the early days, we had to teach them, like, here's the device, here's how you charge it,
Here's what a
all the
stylus
fundamentals.
does.
Here's
Right.
what a stylus does. Here's how you click on the screen.
Yeah.
What happens when calibrations go bad, like everything, right? All the fundamentals. So you've kind of got that out of the way for a lot of people, but there are still some that would be new for. And you need to realize that the guy who uses a flip phone may need the how to where the touchscreen works, but
Sure.
also realize he's out in the field with a glove on. So how does that work for him?
Right.
So maybe they need the pen, right? But
Yeah.
but then if you can give them the actual app or the experience of using the application, and they can practice and get comfortable with it, knowing that they're in a safe environment. I'm not going to mess up production, because if I mess up production, then my supervisor's got to think, like, the cascades, right? And they don't want something to go wrong. They don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to break it. They don't want to be the cause of someone else having to do extra work. So really, hands-on is the best way to train and the best way to learn. And when you think about the people, how do they learn? How does a mechanic learn his trade? How does an electrician learn their trade? They do it all hands-on.
Yeah.
So doing this training hands-on, or something really close to hands-on, right? Like Skillful.
Right. Yep.
Not to make a commercial for you, but like it's a tool, right? And they can learn it that way. And that's the best training for your technicians. And it gives them what they care about, which is, this application. They don't need to, they don't care about all the downstream processes very much, other than, hey, this is what happens when you complete your work, then we can do this next thing, right? Some of them care a little bit about that, but they don't necessarily, and they don't always need to know.
They don't really need to know. And you're right. I mean, to an extent, the people that, care, it's not that they they want to see it go badly. It's just that, we've conditioned them to say, hey, this is your job. These are the 10 steps we need you to do. And we need you to go do those 10 steps 12 times a day, 100 times a day, whatever it is. We need you to go out and serve our customers or whatever the case may be. And you're right. You've said this a couple of times in different ways throughout the session, but when we interject the technology that now holds them back from doing the very thing that we've hired them to do, that creates this like point of friction. And ultimately, I do believe most of these folks, even the folks that are resistant to change, they know that they have to adopt to the new technology. And it's not that they don't want to, it's just that there are some inherent fears. You and I, when we're involved in a project, we've been planning with the folks at corporate for a year or 2 years, or for however long the project planning phase has been underway. And then we go out into the field and we drop this bomb on the folks in the field, and they're having to absorb this all at the same time. And their anxiety level goes, through the roof. And they're like, but wait a second, I still have to do 10 deliveries a day. I still have to move all this product. I still have to do all these other things. And now you want me to do this other thing too, right? And it's stressful, and it may feel comfortable to us. And you talked before about the terminology, like even seemingly little things like our use of terminology. We can simplify the way that we communicate about these changes that are happening. And then to the point that you've made, or that we've both now made, giving them some hands-on experience, whether that's a training environment that is set up like you talked about in the past, or whether it's a platform like ours, being able to give them that hands-on experience to build their confidence and competence at the same time. That's a huge path for success.
And give them, start with what they really just need to know. You think about, if you go to an ATM, you go put in your ATM card, PIN, whatever, you get your money out. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens behind that, but I don't care.
Right.
Like, all I need to know is that the money came out of my account and it's here. Or you go to Amazon on your phone and you order up, a gift, whatever you need to order, it shows up at your door. There's a whole lot that happens behind that most people don't care to even, I don't know how it works. It just shows up. And start with the basic with them, that this is your day-to-day task that you're going to do with this system. Here's how you're going to execute a work order. Here's how you're going to log your delivery, right? Whatever it is. And that's what to start with and focus on. And then they know that. And then then they're comfortable that this is all it is relating to my day job. And some may go, hey, I'm interested in what else happens with this thing. But a lot of them would be like, okay, I can do that. And then you guys do what you do with it. And, that's the focus. Sometimes in training becomes so comprehensive. Like, let's show them everything of what happens in the downstream system, and here's the history of this.
I am so glad.
Keep it simple.
I am so glad you've brought this up. This is something we don't talk about enough on this show, and probably outside of the show as well. And somebody that's close to us mentioned this phrase of minimum viable proficiency. I thought this was really fantastic. We think about MVP as minimum viable product, but minimum viable proficiency. What is the minimum amount of information that we need to convey? What is the smallest number of skills that we need to develop with them inside this new technology that allows them to get back to work quickly? And you really hit the nail on the head. And this kind of speaks to what I was talking about too, where, you and I have been involved in the planning of a project for a year or, year and a half or 2 years or whatever. There are 50 different things that are going to happen. But the reality is the 80-20 rule typically applies, where 80% of the time they're going to use roughly 20% of the functionality. So let's go identify what that 20% is. Let's get them onboarded into that 20%, get them comfortable with that, get them back out into the field, and then tell them where they can get support for those other things when they encounter those odd scenarios, right? When you have a customer that asks you to do some return process that you haven't done before. Okay, well, we didn't give you that in training because we were trying to ease the onboarding process. But of course, there's a way to handle that exception scenario. And here's where you go get information in order to learn how to do that. But I do think you're right. And we've experienced this with some of our customers where they know and are deeply intimate with all 50 new workflows that are going to be deployed, and they feel compelled to train the field on all 50 new workflows. And I actually think that holds back the success of a program far more than just giving them the 10 that they're going to use day in, day out, every single day. Get them up to speed on that 10, get them comfortable with those 10 workflows, and then get them out of here and out into the field and doing their job. And we can we could take on the other 40 over time, but the reality is most of them aren't going to need to know those other 40 functions. And of course, I'm just making up numbers here, but I think that's a really good point you raise.
Well, and sometimes I ask that there's call it the 10 basic workflows that they need, right? But those other ones, how often does the exception happen? And
Yeah.
I've been in like things happen. Oh, it happens, one Tuesday a year when it's sunny outside. And you're like, we don't need to build that into the mobile application, right? Not everything needs to go into the core application. If it's a exception, an exception, we could just, sometimes you can make a phone call still and have someone handle it in the back office.
Yeah.
You want to push as much work as you can out to the techs and let them do it. But sometimes the cost of development, the infrequency of use, and the lack of familiarization of the person who would be using it, like this doesn't happen very often. Maybe they're going to end up calling somebody for help. How do I do this? So let them just call and have someone handle it for them, because it doesn't happen. If you get out, 90% of the noise, 80% of the noise from the office folks, it gives them the time to then handle the other stuff. And that's really what your return on productivity investment comes from, both your field and your office.
It's a fantastic point. We're already coming up on time here. Before we wrap it up, with somebody who's got over 2 decades of experience in serving frontline workforces with mobile technology, is there any advice you'd give to somebody who may be deploying their first mobile solution to a workforce, or maybe looking for ways to improve adoption? Anything come to mind as a piece of wisdom that you can share?
Go out for some ride-alongs. Go out and see what life is like actually out there for the technician. Make friends with some of them, because ultimately, when you roll stuff out, if you've met some of the people, it makes it easier too, that they're like, oh, we know this person, right? And then there's a connection for adoption, and they feel more open to ask questions. But see what it's really like out with them. But bring some of the ultimate end users into the process as you're even doing design, and as you start doing testing, and let them start using the application a little bit and give you feedback on what they like and don't like, and really listen to them, because that's the ultimate user. And sometimes you can, from the office side, we're going to drive change by putting all this in, but often there's a disconnect to what really happens in the field, and listen to what happens and incorporate as much of it as you can. But if it's the third Tuesday of the month exception twice you don't have to put it all in there. Really spend time with the users, because that is where you learn and see the most. And figure out how to do it at the beginning of your project, during the project, and at the end of the project, and plan to spend the time with them. And you learn a lot from them, they learn a lot from you, and it makes an appreciation, I think, that makes your overall project go better.
I think that is fantastic advice. And one other thing that I'll add to that is another value is, when I've done that, I've met people and I bring their first names into the conversation. And I don't even do this consciously or necessarily deliberately, but I remember those names because I spent a day with that person, a half a day or a full day. And I remember Eric, and I remember Essie, and I remember Aaron. I'm talking about specific names of people that I've gone out and spent days with. And I've learned things from those experiences. And so when I come back to my team and I'm talking about how we need to craft our solution to solve it, I'm not just thinking of a field worker. I'm thinking of Essie specifically, a woman that I spent the day with as I watched her, replace motherboards and laptops. Like, I was watching her do this activity, and we got to know each other, and I talked about her son, and we had lunch together. And I really tried to get inside her head because I'm curious and I just want to know. But I think the added benefit of that is that when I come back into the conference room then, and I'm thinking about how are we going to make technology so that Essie can be successful in her role to harness the passion that she has for her job, I'm not just thinking about her as some anonymous user. I'm thinking of her as Essie, that woman that I spent the afternoon with or whatever. So I think that's a really powerful part of it. And it helps drive empathy with the entire team, because now we're actually attaching. I usually take pictures too. I don't know if I'm just weird with this, but I like to take pictures of the work happening out in the field. And my team will tell you those pictures end up in our internal presentations. Like, when we're talking about building product, we are bringing those pictures in and I'm saying, no, I want you to see the tools that they had in their hand while they were doing this thing. Right.
Yeah.
And that's
This is the
really an
environment.
important element. Yes, that goes back to the environment thing, right? So yeah, we might have been indoors, but both sides, they had a tool in both hands, and now we're telling them they need to click on 2 places on the screen. Like something's not going to work here, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really powerful part of it. And I think I hope everybody listens to your advice. It's really good advice to get out and spend some time in the field. So thank you very much for taking the time to share your perspective on this stuff today on the Frontline Innovators, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure to be here. I've had a great time. Happy
Good.
to do another one anytime.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, to our audience, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for investing the time with Bill and me today and just exploring Bill's experiences and other ideas around technology adoption with frontline teams. Hopefully you can take an idea or two from today and put it to work with the frontline teams that you support. And unless this is your first episode, and unless you didn't hear me inadvertently plugging my company, you probably already know that this podcast is sponsored by Skillful. And Skillful is the only end-to-end systems training platform that's optimized for frontline operations. You can learn more about how you can solve your frontline systems training challenges by visiting skillful.com. Yes, I spell it every time because we have a weird spelling. It's SKYLLFUL.com, or you can probably click on the link in the show notes and just go right to the webpage. Thank you so much. And I look forward to you joining us on our next episode. Bill, thanks again for your time today.
Pleasure. Thank you.